Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to this group and to contribute to this conversation, but to be honest, I'm not really sure that I want to. Coming up after some of these speakers, our keynote speaker specifically, kind of makes it a little bit anticlimactic, but I want to give you a little bit of information concerning some of the activities that we've been engaged with in terms of leveraging state and federally funded outreach programs as a means of trying to increase our industrial engagement at the University of Missouri. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is not the work of a long scholarly research project. This is more just basic experience and engagement with some individuals. But two particular people that I would say have influenced my perspective on this conversation is Dr. Ronald Cox at Iowa State University, my former boss and mentor, and Dr. Richard Lester at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And if I don't do anything else this morning, I'd like to draw your attention to a publication that of a report, a project that Dr. Lester was involved with, this university's innovation and competitiveness of local economies. I think that document provides a significant framework, if you will, when you start talking about industrial engagement and how universities can be a player in this market. As we've heard for the last 3 days, the roles of our universities are changing. There are different expectations being put on our institutions. Obviously, the first two there, education and knowledge creation, those are in our wheelhouse. Those are long-time activities for us. But also there's this new interest that's coming out of our states in terms of, and our communities, in terms of regional or economic development. And even though the states are putting less and less into our total budgets, they still have that expectation that we contribute to that development in our communities and in our states. So we need to take into consideration, how are they going to measure that impact? How are they going to look at what we're doing? I've never met a faculty member that couldn't translate what their research was doing to some form of economic or regional development. But when you start translating that to the state legislature or to a community newspaper, there sometimes is a disconnect in the communications there. So we need to talk about how are we going to help them grow local business and industry, jobs, increased sales, tax revenues. Those are the kinds of things that they're interested in. Now, Dr. Lester's project at MIT, they talked about a number of different channels of engagement for institutions when it comes to what they called innovation growth or innovation-driven growth. Education and training, obviously, is the first and foremost one. And that's education on a number of different levels. It's not just our undergraduate and graduate levels. It's also the mid-career activities for industrial executives and the executive education for those individuals, helping them raise their companies to the next level as well. Codified knowledge, research, our patents, our publications, developing prototypes to help further that technological, the boundaries. Scientific and technological problem-solving capacity. This is somewhat of a new one for me in terms of thinking about universities. It encompasses a lot of the things that we have done for a long time, but thinking of it as a combination. And that includes things like venture mentoring programs. We're implementing at MU a new venture mentoring service, modeled off the MIT system. So these are those kinds of things. Technology licensing, obviously, and access to equipment. I mean, if you take an inventory of the manufacturers in all of our states, probably I would venture to say, let's see, we're talking southeast, from Missouri down to Florida, we're talking about an industrial base. Probably at least 85%, if not 90% of our companies are what you might consider small to medium enterprises. People with 100 or 50 to 200 employees. And they don't have the resources to have the types of equipment that we have in our laboratories. So allowing them access to those things is important. Another thing is in public space. You heard earlier about how companies have changed their perspective about how they used to be investing in research and development internally in those companies. They're now looking to invest in our institutions when it comes to that research and development. And that means that their companies no longer have this open space, this kind of safe venue where they can talk about new developments. There's so much of a focus on return on investment that they really are focused on that. When we bring them onto our campuses to talk about, new developments, to review business plan contests, to simply engage as alumni, we give them an opportunity to learn about new subjects, new venues, and new thoughts that could help grow their companies. Now, we also heard earlier about why is this important for us. I think it's interesting, we talk about with sporting events, we talk about young athletes, it's the number of times they get to touch the ball. They get better and better the more times they get touches. If they just sit on the bench and they don't get any time actually playing in the game, think about that young quarterback, that young freshman quarterback. It's, how many times did they get into the game to get them seasoned so that they're ready to play? Well, it's the same thing with our institutions. When we talk about engaging with business and industry, it's the multiple engagements. If you think back to those 4 different channels of engagement, those are different opportunities for us to build the relationships with those companies. The more times we touch them, if you think about it from a sales perspective, how many business majors are in here who have heard them talk about when you talk about a sales? It's the number of times you touch that customer, building that relationship. And when we talk about the multiple engagements, there's an ancillary value in that, or ancillary benefit to it as well. It helps build institutional value. If we have one faculty member that does a great job with a company, and that's the only engagement we have with that company, is that company going to value our institution? No, they're going to value that faculty member. And so when the next time their question comes up, they're looking for that faculty member. But maybe that faculty member has retired, moved on to another institution, moved up to a different position, and they're no longer available to help that company. So that helps build institutional value. And we also heard about building trust. Building trust with companies, helping them understand what does it mean to work with us and what we can do for them. And growing advocates, we also heard about that earlier. If we have these multiple touches with companies, with multiple people in those companies, we help build that pool of individuals that are willing to go to bat for us when it comes to state funding or federal funding opportunities. So here are 4 different pathways that Dr. Lester talks about, and understanding pathways within industry. So it's one thing for us to talk about, we want to engage business and industry from the university standpoint. We also need to understand what is it that our industry is going through in our states or in our regions. So they identified 4 basic areas: creating new industries, which we all have a lot of familiarity with when we talk about faculty startups, new technology startups, those kinds of activities, and building those, growing those into a new industry. Industry transplantation. How many of our states don't have a Department of Economic Development, State Department of Economic Development that's out there recruiting industries, recruiting companies to come to your region? That's the standard model when you talk about state government when it comes to economic development. They want to go out and find somebody else's success and bring it back to our state. Well, how do we help them transplant those industries into our state or into our region? Diversification of old industries. A number of us have seen that over time, where we had a strong industry that has, through changes in the market, changes in demand, changes in technology, they've no longer become relevant. And so we have to help them diversify, use those expertise, use that ability to go into new markets. And then the last one is upgrading mature industries. We have an industry that has, is efficient. If you consider like the steel industry was a mature industry, although that was probably one that was torn down and then restarted. But if you think about trying to help upgrade, implement new technologies for cutting steel or cutting plastic, new processes, helping those kinds of companies. So there are a number of different ways that we can be touching as institutions as well. Now, probably where I should have started talking, there are a number of different state and federal opportunities that are out there. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of state ones simply because our states are so varied, but when you talk about federal opportunities, there are a number of programs out there that help states provide outreach activities, service to business and industry. Things like the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is run out of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. They have a charge to work with small to medium-sized manufacturers throughout your state, helping them in a variety of different performance and technological improvement opportunities. So a lot of times you'll hear folks talking about lean manufacturing or ISO certification. They have experts that can help them from that perspective. One of the things that you can do as a university relationship with those entities, they typically like to hire consultants, traveling guns to come in and help them with those Six Sigma types of applications. But as an institution, we have the opportunity to help leverage and help those companies grow on the technological side, helping them from in terms of developing new products, implementing new technologies, letting them test out new ideas. And as well as, we also heard about the concept of engaging students, engaging our most valuable resource in terms of learning how well they would fit into their companies. So another one would be the small business development centers. All of our states have small business development centers. Many of our institutions have a connection to these. These are run out of the Small Business Administration. Similar to MEP, the small business development centers are interested in helping those small, less than 500 employee companies, helping them find financing, develop marketing strategies, develop better management plans. Another program is the EDA University Center program. Now, the EDA University Center program is a little different than those first two in that it doesn't specifically provide assistance to companies, but in many cases, an EDA University Center can be used to help investigate an industry, to help identify what are the opportunities or what are the needs in a region that then you can use these other programs to help deliver services or help do research that helps grow that and address that issue. Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, the last one I've got there on the list. Defense Logistics Agency, they were charged with the responsibility of helping businesses sell to the federal government. If any of you have ever owned a business and tried to sell to the federal government, or obviously if you've ever submitted a federal proposal for funding, you know about some of the difficulties associated with dealing with the federal government, or state government for that matter. So the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers will help companies jump through the hoops when it comes to identifying markets in the government, the requirements that are necessary to help them do business with the government and help make sure that they're ready for government contracting. Those are just a number of them, or a few of them. I'm sure there are many more that I have not put up there. Now, why would we want to consider this from an industry standpoint or from a university standpoint? Well, these kinds of organizations already have a ready-made engagement with business and industry. And they have a proven track record when it comes to producing results in terms of economic impacts. So I said earlier, Ron Cox at Iowa State was one of my mentors. That organization, over a 5-year period, we could report. We had customer reported impacts of $1.5 billion over a 5-year period. Now that's not a huge number on the national perspective, But when you start talking about a community or a state like Iowa, $1.5 billion in impact is not insignificant. NC State is another program that has a manufacturing extension partnership. And just their manufacturing extension partnership over a 15-year period, they report $2.9 billion in impact. Georgia Tech, just down the road, their Enterprise for Innovation Institute, they serve over 2,500 clients or organizations here in Georgia on an annual basis. So that's 2,500 contacts that your institution could be having with business and industry. At MU, our Procurement Technical Assistance Center over the last 3 years, our folks have helped Missouri businesses secure over $809 million in government contracts. Now, that's a significant number when you start talking about a state budget. Another reason that that I would argue that you need to be engaging with these programs, distributed networks. Because we're operating these federal programs and because we have this need to have local engagement, we usually are in good positions to develop partnerships with other institutions. So we partner with 9 other institutions on our Small Business Development Center program. So we have our regional institutions that we're bringing into the network. We have other private entities, local economic development organizations that we are already engaged with. So when we talk about trying to align the university with that industrial engagement, these organizations already have some of those connections. Now, I won't claim that this is a silver bullet. We all know that silver bullets don't exist, even though as a society, it seems like in the collective we always want a silver bullet, even though we know that there isn't one. But so I'll say that there are curves, there are caution points when it comes to engaging these kinds of programs. It does require management. Pure and simple, you heard earlier about how it requires a level of management because we have to manage expectations, both at the university level and at the industry level. Especially when you start talking about these small to medium-sized companies, they're used to going out and buying what they want. They need to understand, well, when you engage students on a capstone project, they're not guaranteed to get a solution. It's an exploratory kind of activity. When you talk about engaging a faculty member in a research project, okay, there are timelines associated with that, but there's also the educational requirements. There's the semester that we have to deal with. There's the student requirements, the mentoring that goes along with the faculty position. So we have to manage those expectations. Timelines, obviously, industry are interested in timelines, and they want to see us meeting the milestones associated with those timelines. So we have to make sure that we're managing the faculty, managing the students. We have to manage change communication. We have a responsibility when it comes to working with faculty on that, because even if they're just a private consultant with a company, that company sees them as a representative of our institution. And so when there's change that takes place in an agreement or in a research project and that doesn't get communicated effectively, that reflects on our institutions. There are institutional issues. We heard about that already. Contracts, establishing effective, efficient ways of establishing contracts. That's especially important when you start talking about these small to medium-sized manufacturers. They don't have their own legal offices, their own legal departments. In many cases, they're contracting with a local lawyer, and if you start getting into that back and forth, that's an easy way to kill a deal. Obviously, we're still talking about tenure and promotion and tenure. How do we get faculty engaged? Typically, at this point, it's usually the faculty that have already got tenure because they don't have to worry about the rigors of tenure. But we're continuing to push to try to look at new ways there. We heard about publications and impacts. There's also implications from our funders. Matching requirements. The MEP program requires a 2-to-1 match. So where do we come up with those matching dollars? And what qualifies as match? And making sure that we have the folks that can help us work through that process. And deliverables. They typically are very interested in focused deliverables.